Hi, this is AT. The story you're going to hear today is not of earth shaking importance, but it's kind of fun. It appeared first in print in Roger Stone's book, Nixon's Secrets. He may have done an article on this earlier in 2015 in the Daily Caller, but I'm not sure. Stone tells a story of then Vice President Richard Nixon unknowingly muling about 3 pounds of marijuana through New York's Idlewild Airport for jazz musician Louis Armstrong. The year, according to Stone, was 1958. And it's true that Nixon that year was busy performing overseas diplomatic duties for President Eisenhower. According to Stone, Nixon, happened to be at Idlewild at that very time that Louis Armstrong had returned from an Asian goodwill tour. And Armstrong was standing in line where normally he'd be waved through. But apparently there was a rumor that contraband was on the plane. Everybody had to be searched. Well, the closer that Armstrong moved up in the line to be searched, the more he sweat. Because, according to Stone, and I'm quoting, the jazz trumpeter was carrying 3 pounds of marijuana in his suitcase, unquote. And the last thing that Armstrong wanted was to embarrass the country that sent him out on a goodwill tour. But the day was saved when Vice President Nixon, and he's accompanied by his security detail and reporters and photographers, burst into the room and said, and I'm quoting, "Satchmo, what are you doing here?" Armstrong replied, according to Stone, "Well, Pops, I came back from my Goodwill Ambassador tour in Asia, and they tell me I have to stand in this line for customs." Well, at that point, Nixon bends over, picks up Armstrong's 2 suitcases containing the 3 pounds of marijuana, and he said, "Ambassadors do not have to go through customs, and the Vice President of the U.S. will gladly carry your bags for you." Well, later on, Nixon was told the whole story by his aide, Charles McWhorter, a man with a near photographic memory, and was an expert on the subject of music, specifically jazz. And he heard this story from one of Armstrong's musicians. Well, Nixon, according to Stone, after hearing this story from McWhorter, said, "Louis smokes marijuana?" So, is this story true? Well, not everybody believes it. There are reasons to question its veracity, as did Richard Riccardi. Riccardi is director of research collections for the Louis Armstrong House Museum, and he wrote a very good book. It's called What a Wonderful World, The Magic of Louis Armstrong's Later Years. Now, Riccardi reports that the Armstrong-Nixon pot story dated back quite a ways to the early 1990s, and according to the original story, it took place in Paris, not in New York. Both Nixon and Armstrong were about to fly to Moscow, which, by the way, Armstrong is on record as never having visited. Well, Riccardi has other reasons to question Roger Stone's version of the story. But even Riccardi admits some of his fellow jazz aficionados believe one or the other, or maybe another version of the story. And it is possible that Armstrong might very well have visited Moscow or any other Iron Curtain country on an unofficial basis, and therefore there'd be no record of it. And has also been documented, well, by Riccardi himself, among others, that Armstrong made no secret of his use of marijuana, which he saw as a medicine. And it had been reported in the papers that Armstrong's wife in Hawaii at the time, was arrested for having a little bit of pot. But Riccardi went on to argue that because Nixon never mentioned this story in any of his many publications, several of which were autobiographical, then it's likely it never happened. And he is correct. I've read Nixon's Six Crises and also the tome RN, and this story does not appear. However, if you're familiar with Nixon's history, you know that he was, as was Herbert Hoover, a Quaker. And Quakers are very reluctant to bring up things personal, in particular if it's something embarrassing. So, E.T. can say only that Stone's understanding of the Nixon-Armstrong story might contain some elements of truth, perhaps coming from some much earlier coincidental visit by both men to, well, maybe Japan, maybe Moscow. But for the time being, at least, the story must lie somewhere between the verifiable and the apocryphal. Well, that's it. What do you think? Type in your thoughts below, and if you have not done so, subscribe to this channel. And you see that little bell icon? Well, if you tap that, you'll be notified when ET sends up a new upload. Thank you.